Okay, so this is a class, it's really on the Mahayana Vision. It's not a careful description of all the different philosophical schools of the Mahayana. It's rather about a common vision that lies behind all of them. And it's taken from an article that I wrote for Buddha Dharma, the summer 2020 issue, which they gave the really awful title of All Beings Liberating, Together, at Once. And that's just a kind of, it's not a memorable title. The working title that I had was the Mahayana Vision, which I think gives a better idea of what's happening. But when you write for a magazine or a newspaper, they get to put the title on, and you don't even see the title until it's in print. Like when you're going over proofs, you don't see the title, so you can't complain about the title. So it has this title. Okay. And as always, we started the class by people writing in the chat box their thoughts, what struck them, and what questions they had. And since this is a small class, I think I can read what everyone said all together, just one at a time. I won't identify the people so they don't have to be embarrassed. Or actually, these are pretty good comments, but I still won't identify you for privacy reasons. So one person wrote, what struck me, before reading the article, I would have described Mahayana Buddhism by comparing it to Theravada Buddhism, and of course adding in the definition of a bodhisattva. Then I would have ended my definition by saying there really isn't any difference. Always been irritated by those who take great pains to distinguish themselves as Mahayana Buddhist, not Theravada Buddhist, as if somehow being a Mahayana Buddhist is better. Seems Indra's net points to the folly in that thought. After reading the article, I realize my definition is lacking. So what is my Mahayana Buddhism? Is it best to describe it as the metaphor of Indra's net? Is the title of the article, All Beings Liberating Together at Once, really words describing Indra's net? Is there really any difference between Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism? So that's a wonderful question. Here's another comment. Time and space are flexible. I think I understand what this means in terms of the sutras, but what is it saying about reality? Amazing questions here. Another person, what struck me? The translation mistake, haha. Question, does Mahayana include Dalits, used to be called untouchables in India? What about dung and dung beetles? I was struck by the variations in the sutras, vast comic imagery, austere sutras, philosophical, and terse, earthy. It's amazing how varied the Mahayana can be. Is this reflecting the 84,000 expedient means? It seems as though the complexity of the teachings are not necessary when certain truths can be summarized. What is the function of the superlative? For example, the article discussed the ornate nature of certain texts, yet also mentioned more bare texts. These are different styles, and I'm calling the ornate one superlative, but maybe ornate is the better word. What is there to say about the benefits or application of the ornate style? This vision is a steady background for all of the Mahayana, again in quotes. Is this referring to the cosmic vision of all of us attaining together? Indra's net always strikes and amazes me with its beauty and significance. I just want to say, can you imagine a piece of artwork trying to capture this? What actually are the sutras, since they're not the words of the Buddha? Also, can you speak to the lion's roar of Queen Shrimah? What is this? After reading this and knowing some of what I already did about the Mahayana Sutras, I can kind of see why it's called the Mahayana as opposed to the Hinayana. Maha means great and Hina means lesser, but still. Reminds me of Dogen Zenji's Bandawa, which has been a touchstone for me. While I have long remembered nature and the world bringing forth Dharma for me, good to be reminded by this article that I am bringing it forth also for the sake of all beings. I recently learned the word autotroph, the second half of our lungs, someone called them. Basically, plants that give off oxygen. So our lungs are completed by plants. So thank you for your comments. And let's start with the distinction between Mahayana and Theravada. So the Theravada mythology is that Theravada. So Theravada basically is Southeast Asian Buddhism and also South Asian Buddhism, like Sri Lanka. And Mahayana is basically Northeast Asian Buddhism, and then you have Tibetan Buddhism, which is actually Tibet and Mongolia. So these are geographical distinctions, and that's describing where these forms of Buddhism grew up. And of course now they're all over the place. I mean, if you go to Nepal, which is a home base for Vajrayana, for Tibetan-style Buddhism, you'll find Theravada monks and nuns who are doing a tradition that was born in like Burma and Thailand and Sri Lanka and stuff like that. So everything's everywhere. And each group will consider itself superior to the other group. So the Theravada Buddhists say that we are the original. This is the original Buddhism. All other Buddhism is not the true Buddhism. It's not the original Buddhism. And the Mahayana Buddhism will say, we are, as we name ourselves, the great Buddhism. We are much better than any other form of Buddhism because we have all this other stuff that was left out of what we call the Hinayana, but the Theravada. And of course, Hinayana is a pejorative term. And then the Tibetan Mongolian Buddhists, which they call themselves Vajrayana. And they also, well, we're the best because we're a culmination of everything, and we use all the other practices in our Buddhism, and so we're really the best because we're the culmination. So that's human beings. We do this. But Zen comes out of the Mahayana. So not talking about good or bad, it's just Zen comes out of the Mahayana, so that's why we're looking at the Mahayana, because we practice Zen. So there are many distinctions between the Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, and within there are many distinctions. There are different schools. I mean, you have two people, you have three opinions, right? That's how human beings are. And so you have these different schools growing up within each of the broader schools. So the broader school, the broader division is Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, but within all of those you have these schools. And it even reaches the point where, like, there was one school in the Vajrayana tradition that was trying to kill people in another school of the Vajrayana tradition because they thought that they weren't, like, doing it right or something like that. It's human beings, right? So anyway, but we're talking the Mahayana, and the thing that supposedly distinguishes the Mahayana from the Theravada is the notion of the Bodhisattva, the idea that my awakening is not about me, that my awakening is for all beings, and in fact my awakening cannot really happen until all beings are awakened. So hence the crappy title. What is it? I can never remember it. All beings liberating together at once. So the Mahayana Vision is, since you've read the article, the Mahayana Vision, it's very vast, and it's all-encompassing, and it's not just restricted to this planet. It has worlds within worlds. You have these, let's see, I'll grab the Lankavatara Sutra and read you from the opening of the Lankavatara Sutra. Thus I have heard, once the Bhagavan was staying in the South Seas on the peak of Lanka, that's Sri Lanka, in a place adorned by countless jewels and flowers. In addition to an assembly of great monks, he was joined by a host of great bodhisattvas from other Buddha lands, led by Mahamati Bodhisattva Mahasattva. They were masters of every kind of samadhi, spiritual power, and psychic ability, and so on and so on. He had been expounding the Dharma for 7 days in the palace of Sagar, the Serpent King. Upon reappearing, so the serpent says, those are the Nagas, they're human on top, serpent on the bottom, and they live under the ocean. He was welcomed by Shakra and Brahma, a host of serpent maidens. Lifting his eyes and beholding Lanka's Mount Malaya, he smiled and said, on Lanka's Mount Malaya, the Tathagas Tathagatas, the Arhats, the fully enlightened ones of the past, has taught the self-realization of Buddha knowledge, and so on and so forth. And today, for the sake of Ravana, ruler of the Yakshas, that's another kind of being, I too will teach this teaching. And the Yakshas, I think he has like 10 heads or something like that. And so this is, this is like a very vast and cosmic vision. And this particular one is just limited to, what's happening in Sri Lanka. If you open the Avatamsaka Sutra, you'll have, see if I can find it. A boundless, this is sort of a couple of pages into the opening chapter, a boundless host of bodhisattvas, they call them enlightening beings in this translation. The congregation of the site of enlightenment were all gathered there by means of the ability to manifest the lights and inconceivable sounds of the Buddhas. They fashioned nets of the finest jewels from which came forth all the realms of action of the spiritual powers of the Buddha, and in which were reflected images of the abodes of all being. Also, by virtue of the aid of the spiritual power of the Buddha, they embraced the entire cosmos in a single thought. Their lion seats were high, wide, and beautiful, and there's a big description of this. And then later in the sutra, you have this thing where, a Buddha will appear. There'll be like thousands and thousands of this Buddha appearing in thousands and thousands of worlds with thousands and thousands of palaces. So this is a huge, huge, all-encompassing vision. Not restricted to this planet, and that is definitely not in the Theravada. So this notion of this, that the teachings expand through the universe, that there's a saying that in every atom, and I'm not sure what atom means in the context of 3,000-year-old texts or 2,500-year-old texts or 2,000-year-old texts. I'm not sure what atom means, but the idea of a really small constituent of matter, that within every atom is a Buddha. That sometimes it's expressed that way. So that is that's a vast, vast vision that distinguishes the Mahayana, and then the Vajrayana goes off from there, that distinguishes the Mahayana from the Theravada. And Indra's net is an interesting metaphor because, or image, because it's trying to capture this vision, because this vision isn't about eyes, it's about thinking. It's trying to capture this vision in an image. So it's not that the Mahayana is a description of images of Indra's net. It's more that Indra's net is trying to capture the vision of the Mahayana. And at some point somebody asked, can you capture this in art? Well, all the huge temple paintings that you see, that's what they're trying to do. And when the Tibetans do those sand paintings, so all the complex temple paintings of the Mahayana or the Vajrayana, the sand paintings, the mandalas, all of that is trying to capture this vision in some symbolic way. And a question was just posed: what does a Buddha mean in that context? In every atom, a Buddha. Good question. So, and we will get to that question pretty soon, I think, actually. So, it's not better or worse, although, of course, each group considers itself the best. But it's rather trying to understand what the Mahayana is basically about. Now, I'm presenting a kind of unified description of the Mahayana. You have to understand that, of course, there are great differences. There are great differences in practice. like what happens in a Zen center is very different than what happens in a Pure Land temple, which is very different from what happens in a Tiantai temple, which is very different from what happens when you're studying the sutras in a sutra hall. So there are many, and I didn't even mention all the different descriptions, rather all the different groupings. And of course, within the Son tradition, you have distinctions. You have the Cao Dong, Soto versus Linchi, Rinzai, and then within those you have differences, and then you have different combinations. But I'm trying to, and then you have the different philosophies, right? You have the Madhyamika, the middle way, which is not about not too hot, not too cold. It's about, well, it's more technical. I'll get to that in a minute, maybe, if someone reminds me. And then you have the Yogacara, which is the mind alone school. So Madhyamika basically concentrates on emptiness, and that if you say this is true, this is not true, this is true and true, this is neither true nor not true, you can't. So the middle way says none of these are correct. So the middle way is a very highly abstract, logically philosophical position. It's not about not too hot, not too cold. It's not Goldilocks. It's about you can't say it's true, you can't say it's not true, you can't say it's both true and not true, you can't say it's neither true nor not true. That's what the middle way is. And it's focused on emptiness. And then you have the Yogacara school, which is focused on mind alone, which maybe we might get to a discussion of what that means. And these things interact. It's not like they're separate from each other. They sort of interact and cross-fertilize each other and so on and so forth. And then they have schools and sub-schools and sub-sub-schools, and we're not going to get into that, basically. So what I'm trying to do is present rather the sort of background screen that you see whenever you zoom into the Mahayana, to use a contemporary metaphor. Right? So there's this thing that lies behind everything in the Mahayana, and that's the thing that I'm trying to get to. So, so there's this question of time and space, and that relates to the question of, what do you mean in every atom a Buddha? What does that mean? So what Zen always emphasizes is the inadequacy of our consciousness, our sort of what I think of as our frontal lobes, although that's kind of in itself a metaphor. So that our thinking always leads us astray. And this is actually a big part of the Mahayana, of any serious Mahayana philosophy. In some sense, the Yogacara school is really looking at that very carefully. And the Madhyamika school just sort of takes that for granted and bases everything on that. And that's gross oversimplifications there. But this notion that our concept of time and our concept of space are shaped by the way our brains function, and they don't really reflect what's really going on. And I know that it sounds crazy to say that, because time and space, I mean, what's the first thing a baby does? It starts, as soon as it can control its motions, it starts dropping things, right? Put a baby in a high chair and it's going to drop the spoon and it's going to drop the Cheerios. And what's it doing? It's trying to figure space out. Right? It's trying to figure out gravity. It's trying to figure out space. Like, I'm up here, it's down there, I can't get to it. Time takes a little bit longer to figure out. My husband and I were remembering last night how when our son, who is now almost 40, when he was little, he would talk about a little minute, and we'd always tease him, you can't have a little minute, But in his, 4-year-old mind, you could have a little minute, and there were big minutes, and, stuff like that. So, time and space are sort of the bedrock of our perceptions, which is one reason why Zoom is so weird, because Zoom distorts time. You can't do things simultaneously in Zoom, and that kind of distorts our perception of time, and so it's weird. But so time and space are like they're the bedrock that everything rests on, but our perceptions of them actually don't hold water. If you really look very, very hard at it through a scientific lens, you quickly realize, and this was something, I mean, even St. Augustine realized, that we did not understand time, that we could not really perceive time correctly. And space also, and so if you read like relativity theory or quantum theory, stuff like that, you very quickly realize that, okay, what we think of as time and space, they don't really work that way. And I will recommend here Carlo Rovelli's books. He's really fantastic. If you want a nice popular thing by a major physicist, I will recommend Carlo Rovelli. So this is something that was realized, when these sutras were being written, whenever that was. I mean, it was sometime after the time of the Buddha, but we don't exactly know when. So this realization that time and space are not what we think they are. So the sutras are just kind of reflecting that. The sutras are based on meditation. They were written by people who had very serious practice, very serious meditation practice. And so when you do that, you begin to see how you're, don't know. You see that you don't know anything. You see that the way things are the way we've constructed things, that they don't actually work. And so that's where these are working from, and that's why you have this tremendous flexibility of time and space. And the space stuff, and again, this stuff is not, it's not, if you read the sutras, some of them are more philosophical than others, but this comes in not as a teaching. It's not like, oh, we're teaching about space-time and these are the equations that describe it. And it's not like that. It's more taken for granted. So you have like Vimalkirti is sick in his room, and Buddha is going to send all these people to talk to him to make him feel better. And of course nobody wants to go because Vimalkirti always beats everyone in Dharma combat. And Vimalkirti is this rich guy, he lives in this, he's a businessman, he's a merchant of some kind, he's incredibly rich, and he's also an incredibly deep practitioner, and he always beats everyone in Dharma combat. And so they're going to send all these people to talk to him, and nobody wants to go. But finally, Buddha says, go. So they all go. And Vimalkirti's in this room, and then the room expands and expands and expands. But, the house doesn't expand. The city doesn't expand. The country of, what we now call India doesn't expand. But somehow it expands, and all these like thousands and thousands of creatures of all kinds, show up in this room. And that's sort of, so it's like nobody has to say space is flexible. You read the Vimalkirti Sutra, space is flexible. You just see it, And that's sort of how a lot of the stuff in the sutras really work. It's like, instead of looking at the actual philosophical arguments, look at how they're actually constructed. Look at what's really going on there, It's not what they think they're saying, it's like, how are they constructed? That's what they're actually saying. And so this flexibility comes in the construction of the sutras. And the Mahayana includes every creature, not just on this planet. It includes all sentient beings, and the question of what is a sentient being is important, because in some versions of the Mahayana, this pen is a sentient being. The wall behind me is a sentient being. If every atom has a Buddha inside it, then everything is sentient. So mind alone has sort of two ways it could go. It could go like, our mind makes everything, which is true, and it also can go, everything has mind. So there's sort of two ways to interpret this phrase, mind alone. Everything in the universe is mind alone. This is in the Avatamsaka Sutra, and it's in our morning bell chant. If you wish to understand all Buddhism, past, present, and future, you should understand that this universe is made of mind alone. So does it mean this universe is made by our mind perceiving it? Or does it mean that everything in this universe has mind? It means both. So, anyway, it includes Dalits, and it includes shit. It includes beetles that roll shit around. It includes everything, right? Absolutely everything. Coronavirus. Yep, that's part of the Mahayana. Everything's part of the Mahayana. And that's important to understand, because including everything means we don't just include the stuff that we like. So Zen Master Sung-san used to say, if you want something, you don't get anything. If you don't want anything, then you get everything. But everything means everything. It doesn't mean, only your favorite flavor of ice cream. It means everything. So, that relates to the central insight that, everything, that the first noble truth, that all beings suffer, that existence means suffering. And then, of course, here's the cause of suffering, here's the way out, and there is a way out, and here's the way out. So the four noble truths, but the first one is everything is suffering. So we have to understand that, and that is very big in the in the Mahayana. That it's like you go through suffering rather than trying to get rid of it. It's just everything all together is very important. And the sutras are enormously varied. Somebody asked about what is the Lion's Roar of Queen Shrimah. It's not well known, and I don't know how I managed to find this. Here it is, Lion's Roar of Queen Shrimah. Is in the Buddhist Tradition series, published in India, which means it's going to be hard to get. But you can try to do it. It's a very serious publishing. Like they published Burton Watson's version of the Vimalakirti Sutra, probably took it from the American publisher. They have some very serious stuff in here, and this is part of it. And this is the sutra where she expounds the notion of bodhicitta, the desire to awaken. And the desire to awaken is a very interesting notion, because since time kind of collapses, in some versions of Mahayana, the desire to awaken is itself awakening. So everyone here hopefully has the desire to awaken. So you're already awake, but that doesn't mean you have to stop. You can stop because you have to keep going. But it's like not like the desire, I'm over here and there's this beautiful jewel over there and I want that jewel and I have to go over and do something to get it. It's more like that jewel and me, we're not separate. So we are all already Buddha. We are all already awake. That's a big thing in the Mahayana. Already we are awake. But we don't believe it. So we mess up all the time. And a lot of people don't understand what this awake means. So we get caught, in our ego little boxes. but we are all already awake. This is, our destiny is to be awake. And at birth we were awake. And before birth we were awake. And after death we'll still be awake. Whatever we are, whatever that means, it's awake. But to actually manifest that awakening is the difficulty. So, and so let's talk a little bit about the Mahayana Sutras. Well, first let me comment on this. It seems as though complexity of the teachings are not necessary when certain truths can be summarized. I don't think summarized is the right word, because summarized means it's, intellectual. It means it's something you can check off on a page somehow, right, wrong. But it's more that the teachings can be manifest, they can be realized. The complexity comes when we try to understand them intellectually. So there's kind of this basic vision, and then when we try to understand it intellectually, then the complexity arises. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we have to look at these things. We can't go around in this big cloud of, oh, everything's one, oh, wonderful, But the complexity will arise from this, and in some sense it's kind of necessary, because we need to really look at, well, what do we mean when we say this, when we say that, and then understand that as we pin them down, we're in one way understanding them better, and in another way we're losing something. And it's very important to understand that, but there's nothing wrong with trying to intellectually understand that and looking at the teachings. The question is, how do we manifest them in our lives? So that's the important thing. So let me talk a little bit about some of the sutras. And I don't seem to have a copy of the Diamond Sutra here, which means my husband snatched it and did something with it, because we have like a gazillion versions of it. But so you have the Diamond Sutra, which is very austere. And the structure of the Diamond Sutra is that Subhuti asks a question of the Buddha, and then the Buddha responds and then asks questions of Subhuti, and Subhuti answers them, and then you keep getting, well said, well said, well said, like that. And the structure of the Lankavatara Sutra, which is a very philosophically complex and abstract description basically of mind. There's a reason why the Lankavatara Sutra was supposedly the sutra that was brought by Bodhidharma, founder of Zen, to China, that this really, it's sort of, I can't say encapsulated, it sort of expands a lot of the concerns that we have in Zen practice about mind and how it functions and how it distorts things. And basically what we have here is that, and now I'm forgetting his name, the main guy in this. So basically, an outline is presented to Buddha by Mahamati. And Mahamati sort of gives like the outline, and then Buddha fills in the answers or fills in the gaps in the outline. And then Mahamati builds on what the Buddha said and then gives another series of questions or structures for Buddha to fill in. And so it's kind of like Mahamati wrote the course description, and the Buddha is teaching the course. It's kind of like that. Mahamati wrote the syllabus, and the Buddha is teaching the course. The lion's roar is where supposedly bodhicitta first appears, and it's described as the origin of the Tathagata Garbha theory. So Tathagata, that's the thus come one. So it's the Buddha nature, basically. So Buddha nature, and basically she does the teaching, and then, Buddha, then the Lord, rejoicing at Queen Shrimah's explanation of the embrace of the illustrious designs of great striving, said, "Queen, exactly so." And then he talks a little bit more about how she was correct. And then she'll go on, talk about something else at great length, and then go, "Yes, that's right." And then he'll say a little more. And so she's basically developing this. It's really not a well-known sutra, and I don't know why not, because it's even short. Look, it's short, right? And then, let's see, what else do I have here? Obviously don't have all the sutras. They're, 84,000. Lotus Suture is extremely important. And the Lotus Sutra, Buddha basically does most of the talking here, which is unusual in a sutra. But a lot of what he says, he tells a lot of stories and parables, like the burning house, the father whose kids are in the house and they're playing and there's a fire and he can't get them out of the house, so he has to promise them these carts to get them out of the house. And the Dharma rain, which rains on all creatures great and small, that's in there. So there are these parables in there. And then also he praises people. Just one chapter after another chapter is based on, oh yeah, you're going to become this kind of Buddha, and your Buddha world will be such and such and such. And you're going to be this kind of Buddha, and your Buddha world will be such and such and such. And that's a lot of the structure of the Lotus Sutra. Is Buddha's doing a lot of the talking, but what he's doing is he's telling other people how they're going to become Buddhas. So that's the structure of the Lotus Sutra. Vimalakirti Sutra, I've already talked a little bit about. Buddha basically sends everybody off, and then everybody, has to encounter Vimalakirti, and then there's some other encounters. It's a funny sutra. There are jokes. There's plots and subplots. It's really one of the more entertaining sutras. I recommend reading it. Basically, it's carried very little by Buddha. It's carried by all these other people and bodhisattvas and stuff interacting with each other. And then you have the Avatamsaka Sutra. It weighs about 5 pounds, 4 pounds, I don't know. It's really big. And this is, well, of course, some of this is introduction, but no, it actually starts pretty early. Not much of it is introduction. And it's all bodhisattvas. This focuses on now I'm forgetting his name. The great Vairocana. So this is really Vairocana Buddha, the Buddha whose his body is the universe. He's sort of it's like he's the cosmic Buddha, but he doesn't say anything. It's that he empowers all these bodhisattvas to speak. And this is like the real heavyweight sutra of the Mahayana, and it's incredibly, incredibly complex. And it contains both the Majjhimika and the Yogacara in it. They're both there. And the school of Buddhism that comes out of this is called Hawaiian Buddhism. In Korean it's Hwaom. And they call themselves the Ekayana, which means the one vehicle. So they sort of see themselves the way the Vajrayana does, as the vehicle that absorbs all the other vehicles, all the other forms of Buddhism. And it's incredibly ornate. And I will just, at random, let's see, So this is they is recurring to bodhisattvas. When they expound the teaching, their expressions interlink, the meanings are free from contradiction and confusion. They observe the context of the teachings, analyze them wisely, determine right and wrong, accord with the definitive marks of things, impermanence, dispassion, and selflessness, and progressively set up boundless practical approaches to call all sentient beings to cut off all doubt. They know all faculties well, enter into the teachings of the enlightened, experience true reality, know things are equal, cut off all attachment to things, eliminate, and so on and so forth and so on. So it's very ornate and complex. Having gone forth in a single instant, they suddenly attain 1,000 concentrations, see 1,000 Buddhas and recognize their power, shake 1,000 worlds, go to 1,000 fields, and this does not mean like, something that deer eat grass in. Go to 1,000, that's a Buddha field, illuminate 1,000 worlds, mature 1,000 beings, live for 1,000 eons, penetrate 1,000 eons past and future, contemplate 1,000 teachings, and manifest 1,000 bodies, each body manifesting a company of 1,000 enlightening beings, the bodhisattvas. Then bodhisattvas with superior power of commitment by the quality of excellence of vows transform their bodies, auras, mystic powers, visions, spheres of operation, voices, conduct, adornments, power resolutions, and performances in countless ways. So that's a vision. That's really something. This body becomes 1,000 bodies in 1,000 worlds, in 1,000 times and spaces, in 1,000 Buddha fields. So that's the Avatamsaka Sutra. And we have a friend, a teacher in our school, Barry Briggs, and his practice is either before or after he meditates every day, he reads a page of the Avatamsaka Sutra, which will take him, like 1,200 practice pages to finish it. So you can figure out how many years that is. It's a lot. But yeah, so anyway, that's and a new message. So let me try to summarize the vision of the Mahayana. So the vision of the Mahayana is vast. It's not restricted to our species. It's not restricted to our planet. It's not restricted to our solar system. It's not restricted to our universe. So that's one thing. It believes in the inherent Buddha nature of every being. And whether being means conscious being or simply having some kind of physical presence or maybe just some kind of field of energy, you can argue about that all you want. But however you want to define being, every being has Buddha nature. And our job, the job of every being, and the destiny of every being is to awaken to this Buddha nature and to awaken together. You can't do it alone. And by doing it, you've all done it, which doesn't mean what we think it means. You think it means you go to a high mountain and you awaken and then somehow magically all beings. No, it means we're working together. We're constantly working together. Even if you're on a high mountain by yourself, you're not by yourself. You're in this universe. You are not separate from this universe. And then we have this dominant image of Indra's net to express the interconnectedness of all beings and their jewel-like nature. And so that's basically the Mahayana in 30 seconds. Do I recommend reading some of these ornate and complex sutras? It depends on whether you can read them. I have to confess that I cannot get very far in the Avatamsaka Sutra. My brain sort of slides off the page because the language is just too ornate for me. I can't deal with it. I can, read parts of it, and especially these poems. What the structure is, you'll have like a prose section that is very long and complicated, and then you'll have a poem summary, and that's not just here, that's also in the Lotus Suture. And it's a very nice little technique. And so I can read the sort of summary parts. But yeah, my mind tends to slide off the page, but there are other people that really get a lot from it. So whoever you are, however you are, however your mind works, I recommend looking at this stuff and trying to figure out what you can read and what you have trouble reading. I think everyone should read the Diamond Sutra because it's short, and also the Vimalkirti Sutra because it's funny. I think the Lotus Sutra and the Lankavatara Sutra, and even if you don't read them front to back, to dip into them is, I think it's a good thing to do. If you can find the Lion's Roar of Queen Shrimah, it's worth looking at. You don't have to read these front to back. You can dip into them. They're traditionally used as people chant them. So that's, you could do what, my friend Barry does, just read a page at a time, or you could try reading out loud like a phrase or something like that. There's many ways to look at these sutras besides as textbooks. But I certainly recommend trying to read them, trying to look at them. I do want to say that without practice experience, they're dead words. So I don't recommend reading them unless you have some kind of practice experience. I was not able to make sense of them until I'd been practicing for about 10 years, which might mean that I'm like really sort of a real slow learner, and it might be that someone who's practiced a day can make sense of them, but they just didn't. I didn't understand what they were referring to, what they were talking about. I just hadn't had the personal experience of meditation that could open my eye, my mind's eye, and say, oh, that's what they're talking about. It's like if you've been blind since birth and people talk about red and green, then what is it going to mean to you? But if then you have some kind of surgery and you can see color, and then, oh, that's what they're talking about. So I do recommend not reading them with a kind of intellectual mindset that doesn't get the point. And I think meditation is necessary in order to get the point of what they're saying. And there's another question here. When Buddha nature has every being has Buddha nature. So I'm not sure what you mean by that question. And you can unmute yourself and speak. You won't show up because I'm spotlighted. So if you want to speak, or if you want to write in the chat and say, because there's a question mark there, and I'm not sure what the question is. So do you want to expand on that?
Are the two alternatives somehow dependent on one another? That the Buddha nature has all beings, and all beings having Buddha nature?
I don't know. Okay. So I think it's more that all beings have Buddha nature. I don't know what the Buddha nature has all beings would mean. It's that all beings have Buddha nature is, I think, what the way it's used. But yeah, you could. That's me too. You could put it as Buddha nature pervades the universe, and that's sort of the image of Vairocana. It's like Vairocana is this sort of like cosmic gas or energy or something that pervades, every bit of space, every bit of matter, every bit of something. So, if you could, sort of comic book thing, if you can imagine, in the comic book where this little gas sort of starts going across the page, and you can think of Vairocana that way, is Vairocana permeates every slight bit of this universe. And then in that sense, I guess then Buddha nature has every being, like Buddha nature permeates everything. Yeah, you could see it that way. And it's our minds that decide, is this the same? Is this different? That's where the intellect starts coming in. But this sort of bedrock, this kind of ground that somehow Buddha nature is pervasive, and whether we want to see it as it infiltrates, or whether we want to see it as every being contains it, that's like, then that's when we start getting all the different philosophical schools and stuff. But this notion of this, that it's everywhere, that it permeates, that nothing is lacking it, that Buddha nature is everywhere. We all have it, or we're all permeated by it. Either image is fine, because they're just images, right? So yeah. So thank you for your clarification of your question. Are there any other comments or questions anybody would have? I would ask, do you want to talk about Bendawa? You have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Whoops. I just muted you by mistake. Could you unmute yourself again? Yeah. Do you want to talk about?
Okay. Yeah, because it talks about imperceptible mutual assistance, imperceptible mutual accord with all beings. I'll just read you a line or two, which I used to have this memorized. It's grass, trees, and lands which are embraced by this teaching together radiate a great light and endlessly expound the inconceivable profound Dharma. Grass, trees, and walls bring forth the teaching for all beings, common people as well as sages. And they in accord extend this Dharma for the sake of grass, trees, and walls. Thus the realm of self-awakening and awakening others invariably holds the mark of realization with nothing lacking. And realization itself is manifested without ceasing for a moment. It just goes on and on like that. And it's totally has had my heart for long time.
So how long is the Bendawa?
It's short. It's very short.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very short. There's some questions and answers in it that I don't really pay much attention to. But the text of it itself is very, very short. I'll read you one more sentence.
Okay.
Because such broad awakening resonates back to you and helps you inconceivably, you will in Zazen unmistakably drop away body and mind, cutting off the various defiled thoughts from the past, and realize essential Buddha Dharma. Thus you will raise up Buddha activity at innumerable practice places of Buddha Tathagatas everywhere, cause everyone to have the opportunity of ongoing Buddhahood, and vigorously uplift the ongoing Buddha Dharma.
Thank you. That's really wonderful. I don't know if we're going to end here, but it would be a great place to end, because Dogen is this extremely austere, philosophical Japanese. What century did he live in? Like 12th century? 1300s, 14th century Japanese teacher who revitalized Soto Zen in Japan. And Soto Zen, in many ways, seems to be the opposite of something like what I think of as the high Mahayana. Like, their temples are very stripped down. You don't have these big temple paintings. Their robes are black, and it's extremely austere. They don't have 1,000 ceremonies where you're lighting 1,000 candles on 1,000 different occasions, and it's just a very different feeling from like a Chinese or a Korean Mahayana, Pure Land or Tiantai or Hawaiian or whatever temple. It's a very different kind of, and even Korean Son, Korean Zen and Chinese Chan, Chinese Zen, they are much more ornate. And yet that's a perfect expression of the Mahayana vision. That's absolutely perfect. So there we go. Like the most, when you think of Zen, the most Zen of Zen, which is Dogen, who people in Soto Zen practitioners, like Dogen is their god. Like they study Dogen so much that somebody who had studied Soto practiced with us, started practicing with us about 20 years ago, and was shocked that we never studied Dogen. And we were like, well, why should we? We're from Korea. We're Korean Zen. Even the Rinzai Zen people don't study Dogen, and they're Japanese, so why should we study Dogen? And and it's like, but yeah. So you have the austerest of the austere, and then there it is. That's the Mahayana Vision. That's fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, so it lies. As I pointed out in my article, this vision lies behind a lot of Zen stuff. I mean, it pops up in these, you have this bodhisattva that appears down from 10 million whatever lands, and suddenly he appears and does this magical stuff. And, I give several other examples of where in the Kangan records, the Blue Cliff record, the Mumonkan, all this stuff, the transmission of the lamp, this stuff comes in. It comes in because it's the background for all of it. And the vision that it has is definitely, just as Carol pointed out, it is definitely the thing that's sitting behind Zen. That deep, deep interpenetration that all beings have with each other. And that dependence that our awakening is not just for us, that it's for this world. I mean, that's definitely there. So thank you. And Dogen says it a lot better than I can. So thank you very much. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add? Well, if not, I'll say thank you for the wonderful class. And we can stop recording now. I can stop it.